Wednesday. How's everybody doing? Let me get the do not disturbs going. Okay, fantastic. Got a beautiful daf for us today. Let me just get that in front of me so I can see people's comments. Okay. So many people have been sending me stuff. Here we go. James Roth in the house. Stephanie Pink Mama Frieden. Leslie Ann Landsberg, good to see you. And let me open another window for the YouTube side. Usually try to get that done before I go live. But this gives it a little bit of a chance for people to tune in, so that's always good. Okay, here we go. Deborah Hazelwood in the house from Florida on the YouTube side. Fabulous. Okay. Rochelle is in from Modesto. Yehudit from Florence, South Carolina. Vanessa says Shavua Tov. Leslie Ann Landsberg. Gotta be in from Texas. Okay. Let's get on with it. A little Mother's Day learning. I didn't get the name in time, but I want to dedicate today's learning. Let me see if she wrote back to me. I don't have the name, but Rabbi Robbins asks us to dedicate today's learning for the refuah shlema of her husband. May we only hear good news. May he have a complete healing and recovery. I'd also like to dedicate today's learning to my mom. I miss you so much, Mom. My mom lives in a memory care facility in Florida. Haven't been able to have a conversation with her. I mean, it's going on 5 years now. I visit, but you know, it's not like it used to be. We used to talk all the time, and the dementia has been very difficult, very challenging. And now during the pandemic, even harder, because my dad, who normally would go visit her in the memory care facility every day, is not allowed to go. So, you know, we're all aware that nursing homes are very high vulnerability places and have to adhere to much stricter rules. And that's necessary and important. There's a big cost to that, you know, and particularly in a memory care facility where the residents don't understand, perhaps, why their spouses and their children are not allowed or not able to come and visit them. We should only hear good news soon. Let there be a vaccine. Let there be what we need so that we can visit our parents and grandparents in memory care facilities. And let's dedicate today's learning to that healing, that it should come now into the world, and let's say Amen. Okay. Marcia Wright is in from Black Mountain, North Carolina. Stacy from Washington. Chuck from South Florida. Ed from Galloway, New Jersey. We got a full house, thank God. So let's do some great learning today, some terrific learning with some ruach, with some spirit. What are we learning? Okay, so we're holding in the second volume of the Talmud, Tractate Shabbos. We're in chapter 6, which is all about what people can wear beyond clothing, accessories, jewelry, and other kinds of things, even our animals. What sorts of accessories may they wear when they leave the private domain and go out into the public domain on Shabbos? And we've sort of been going back and forth between, you know, requirements and restrictions for women, and then for men, and for women, and for men again, and then for women again. So now today we're going to finish our discussion of the fifth Mishnah in chapter 6, and then do the sixth Mishnah as well. So we've been discussing cloths that a woman may wear. Perhaps, you know, like a little wad of cloth in the ear because perhaps she's having some ear problems, an earache, and there might be something coming out of the ear, or in a sandal, almost like a bandage or something for comfort in a sandal. And these things are generally permitted, that a woman can use them when she goes out on Shabbos into the public domain. And while we're having this discussion, we do a little, almost a digression, but it's certainly pertinent to Shabbos. And we learn that in cases of Marit ha'ayin means appearance of impropriety. So there are certain things that it's going to look like a person might be violating Shabbos, even though they're not. They're not doing anything wrong, but people might think they're doing something wrong. And in some of these cases, the rabbis, the sages, will prohibit the behavior lest the neighbors come to suspect that you're doing wrong. So an example of this is on Shabbos, your clothes get wet. Perhaps you're lucky, you're blessed, you have a pool, and you fell in the pool. Or there was some rain, you were outside, you were walking in the rain, your clothes got all wet. So you might, in your private courtyard, put the clothes out to dry in the sun. What would be wrong with that? There's nothing wrong with that. You haven't violated any Torah prohibition on Shabbos. But the concern is, if you hang your clothes out to dry, let's say on a clothesline, people might think that you did laundry on Shabbos. And lest they suspect that you are not a Shabbos observant neighbor, the sages said, just don't do it. Don't do it. If your clothes get wet, just change. Put on other clothes. And even in the privacy of your own home, don't put them out to dry. And the principle that we learn here from Rav is that in matters of Marit ha'ayin, appearance of impropriety, we don't do them in a public place, obviously, because that's what this is all about. But in matters that the rabbis issued a decree for appearance of impropriety, we don't do them even in the innermost chambers, even in a private place where no one can see it. So how could there be appearance of impropriety if no one can see it? There's no appearance. And yet they say don't do it there either. I think the simplest way to understand that is that if we're having, if we're engaging in conduct that carries the appearance of impropriety, but we're doing it because it's only in the privacy of our home, so we may just come to make that a habit and then end up doing it in the public where we would be, engaging in the kind of conduct that the rabbi sought to decree against in the first place. But this idea, why should we care about appearance of impropriety? Let me just refresh this because I'm not sure that it's live, and I want to make sure this may spur some commentary, and I want to be able to catch it. Okay. What is people saying? I don't understand what you mean. Amos, I like all people. Must be a conversation above. Okay. But in terms of appearance of impropriety, it's a subtle thing. On the one hand, we should say, listen, it doesn't matter what the neighbors think. If I know that I'm behaving correctly before God, why should I worry that they might think less of me? But maybe that promotes a gossip culture, and maybe just steering clear of it. See, this is one of those fences around the Torah. If we steer clear of behavior that might lead to people suspecting us, it also just helps us to steer clear of that behavior generally. Where else does this come up? It came up with the donkey with the bell. We learned that we don't let a donkey go out on Shabbos with a bell on it, even if we plug the bell. Why? Because in Talmudic times, why would a donkey go out in the public domain with a bell on it? It wasn't the kind of bell that you just use so that you can keep track of your donkey. Back then, the bell was it had a commercial significance. It meant, hey, this donkey's for sale. I'm taking it to market, and everyone should look at my first-class donkey, which is for sale. You don't want to miss it, because somebody else is going to buy it before you do. Since the bell had that meaning, so we wouldn't, go out with the bell on Shabbos because we're clearly not going to market. A person could say, well, I plugged the bell. You can't hear the bell. It's not attracting attention in that way. But it's difficult to remove the bell because the halter, which is permitted because you can keep the halter on the donkey so you can lead him around on Shabbos safely, and like the bell is attached to that. So it's difficult to remove the bell. Doesn't matter, appearance of impropriety. However, we learn that a person may walk his donkey around in his courtyard with the bell, if the bell stays on, as long as it's plugged so it doesn't make the noise. So this would seem to contradict the teaching about the laundry. You can't, dry it in the sun or on a line in the courtyard because it's one of those matters of appearance of impropriety. And so we see that, we're getting into nuances where it's a little bit difficult to rule, and that's why this is one of those cases where the sages are not going to come to a final determination, and it would depend more on your circumstances and what you're trying to accomplish or avoid in your locality. And so this is one of those places where if you had a question about can I do this or not, is there an appearance of impropriety problem? Can I do it inside my house so that no one would see it anyway? It's one of those things where if you're not sure, you got to go see your rabbi, right? Your rabbi in your community and get a ruling there. That's why some of these things in Talmudic discussions end up on teiku. They left it unresolved. It wasn't resolved because it's one of those questions that has a lot of local and era implications, depending on your era, depending on what the norms are in your society at your period in history. So, let us move on. Also in this Mishnah, the fifth Mishnah came up with the question of a false tooth. May a woman go into the public domain with a false tooth? And so there was a dispute here. And first of all, there was a lot of back and forth. I'm not going to get too into it because I want to get to the next Mishnah. But what was interesting is there's a distinction between a gold tooth and every other kind of false tooth, whether made of silver or wood or some other material. So generally speaking, in all the other cases except the gold tooth, no problem. Right? The woman can go out with it if she would have a gap in her mouth, but for this false tooth or the silver tooth or the what. These days, of course, we have beautiful teeth where you can't even tell that it's a false tooth. But in all these cases, the rabbis permitted. In the beginning, some didn't, but they came around and everybody permits. The dispute is with the gold tooth. With the gold tooth, the concern is she might remove the gold tooth from her mouth to show her friend in the same way as the first Mishnah of this chapter where a woman wasn't allowed to go out with jewelry in the Talmudic period because she might take off the jewelry and show it to her friend, and then she might come to carry a burden in the public domain and violate a Torah prohibition. With regard to the gold tooth, Rebbe and Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Shimon all say, listen, she's not going to take it out of her mouth. That's silly, because we can rely pretty much that anything that's going to make a woman look less appealing is not something that she's going to do in the public domain, right? If you would have a gap in your teeth, if you took this thing out, why would you take it out even to show a friend? It's just not going to happen. And so they would permit even the removable gold tooth. Everybody else permits all kinds of teeth, even the gold tooth. If it's not removable, that's permitted. But the removable gold tooth, the sages said, yep, no, she can't do that. And as I said, Rabbi Eliezer and Reb Shimon would have permitted that. Interestingly, we come to modern times, and this is not something I'm very familiar with, except that I've seen it in magazines and news programs on TV. But nowadays, I guess in part of hip hop culture, people have these grills, right? And they're like a whole series of gold teeth, and very clearly jewelry. It's not meant for eating your lunch. They're not false teeth in that way. They're like tooth covers made out of gold, very flashy. It's just like a way to wear jewelry on your teeth. I think the sages would say, see? That is a kind of tooth, a gold tooth, that somebody might well take out of their mouth and show it to a friend, come to carry it, drop it, not want to put it back in their mouth. It's very valuable. and then they might come to carry it in the public domain and violate Shabbos. So something to be said for the rabbi's position on this question. Let me just check my notes. Okay, and that brings us to the 6th Mishnah in chapter 6. It's a short Mishnah. I want to read it to you because it's pretty interesting. A woman may go out with a sela coin that she ties on a wound on her foot. The young girls may go out with strings and even with wood chips that are in the holes of their ears, meaning when they got pierced ears, and so that the hole won't close, they could use a string or a wood chip to keep the hole open. Young girls would have their ears pierced, but earrings were not placed in their ears until they were older. Next principle, Jewish women in Arab countries may go out veiled with a scarf covering their face, and Jewish women in Medea may go out with cloaks fastened with stones. And any person in any place is permitted to go out on Shabbos clothed in that way. However, the sages spoke in the present, addressing prevalent situations. Meaning, in that place, in that time, it made sense. You would have to check whether this rule would make sense in your place and in your time, according to your local rabbi. A woman may fasten her cloak on a stone by inserting a small stone and wrapping her cloak around it, as she would with a button, and likewise she may do so on a nut or a coin, as long as she does not fasten her cloak with them on Shabbos ab initio. Right? So this is one of those principles that is okay to use a coin, a nut, or a stone as a fastener for a headscarf or some other kind of a cloak, but you shouldn't set that up on Shabbos. You would have needed to designate the nut or the stone before Shabbos, and with a coin, as we'll see, you needed to actually create it as a fastener before Shabbos began. What I find interesting here is, now it just doesn't happen so much. There's not so many Jewish communities in Arab countries. But for centuries, many centuries, there were large Jewish communities in Arab countries. And there, women would have to wear, I don't know if it would be called a hijab, if a non-Muslim woman is wearing that head covering, but just to conform with the standards of those countries and to be properly attired, it's just be unsafe not to wear that head covering in those countries. And even 2,000 years ago, our sages are saying in such a country, you can wear that head covering, that face covering, and you can fasten it in a way that makes sense, and that's not going to be a violation of Shabbos. Either because that's just the custom there, and if they ruled against it, if they decreed against it, then what would women do? They couldn't function. So they could, or possibly even if it's a question of safety, that's another reason why they could do it. But in any case, Jewish women could put on that kind of headscarf and face covering in those countries where it is the norm. But we have right there in the Mishnah saying, and it makes sense at that time and place, right? If you live in a non-Arab country where no one goes around that way, but you want to go around that way, and you're Jewish, so you have to think twice about it and check with the rabbi to see if that makes sense and it is in fact a permissible action. Okay, let me just get this back in front of me. Now, Melissa says, I would say that causing someone to go out with something like a false tooth would cause them to be embarrassed on Shabbos. Exactly, and we don't do that. That only question was with the gold tooth, right? And in the end, I don't think that restriction exists today in the same way that we don't have the restriction on jewelry. Jewish women may wear their jewelry when they go out on Shabbos, and I bet that the gold tooth is the same deal today. But back then, there was this concern. However, generally speaking, the rabbis absolutely agree with you. You don't do something that's going to be embarrassing because then the people won't go out at all. It's going to be an undue restriction. And if it would be embarrassing to remove it, we certainly have no concern that they would remove it while they're in the public domain and come to carry. So you make a very good point there. On this idea of strings in the ear hole, right? So like girls would get their ear pierced, and then to make sure that the hole stays open, they would put like a little piece of wood or a string in the hole until they could actually get jewelry. These were poor people. They didn't just, get pierced and get a nice gold earring. Sometimes they would get the piercing and have to wait some time until they got an earring, and they would use the string. But the father of Shmuel, the great rabbi in Babylonia, his father would prohibit his daughters from putting those strings in their ears, in the ear hole, if they were beautiful multicolored strings. Because at that time, they had that restriction on jewelry, and so these very pretty multicolored strings were too similar to jewelry and not this kind of more almost medical use of keeping a piece of string or wood in the ear hole just to keep the ear hole open. Now, this idea, I'm trying to understand how this works. I think it's like they're talking about a cloak, and you're going to use a stone, a nut, or a coin to fasten it. So I'm just imagining this. Probably people can help me out, you know better than me. But I'm imagining it's almost like you have a cloak that has a little hole, like a buttonhole, right? And then if you took a little rock, something small, like about that size, that you could shove through the buttonhole, right? I'm just trying to imagine this thing. Do I even have anything like this? But it's almost like, right? There was a buttonhole here. You take the other side of the cloth and you shove it through there, right? And then the stone or the nut would rest behind the buttonhole. So now it would be a nice firm fastening. And so you created a button type of closure, even though you didn't have a button sewn into the cloth. This would be problematic normally because it's not attached, right? We've said that if things are attached to the clothing, okay, then it becomes part of the clothing. But this stone or nut or coin as a closure isn't really attached. It's suspended there, and it would otherwise be muktzah. It would not have a valid Shabbos use. But the rabbis are saying, it's okay, you can do it, you're using it for clothing, and it's firm. The rabbis sort of looked into it and said, okay, yeah, that's firm. It's not going to fall out. The whole point of fastening the woman's head covering that way is that it's a firm fastening, so it won't fall out. But the caveat that the rabbis say is, if you're going to use a stone, right, some kind of a little rock, that's muktzah. A rock doesn't have a use on Shabbos, and we don't touch pebbles and sticks and stones and dirt if we can avoid it. They don't have a Shabbos use. But if you're going to use a stone to be that fastener through the buttonhole, so then you have to think to yourself before Shabbos, I'm going to use that stone in that way. It's designated for that purpose. A nut, same thing. A nut, it's not a muktzah issue. A nut you can certainly eat right on Shabbos, but if you're going to use it as a button, a non-attached accessory, you have to think about that in advance. With a coin, which is strong muktzah, right? We don't touch money on Shabbos. And so here we had two teachings in the previous Mishnah and in this one where a coin can be used on Shabbos. In the one case with a medicinal purpose, that a woman who has some kind of like a wound on her foot or a chafing, there's some situation where the foot, let's say the heel of the foot is a little bit injured, and putting a coin in the sandal will actually alleviate some of that discomfort. So then the coin can be used because we're not using it as money. We're not going to take it out and buy something with it. We're not putting it in our sandal so that later, we'll have a coin and we can spend money on Shabbos. The woman is using the coin to alleviate discomfort, and so it is permitted. If the coin is going to be used as a fastener on this head covering or cloak, so then she has to set that up before Shabbos. It's not enough just to think, Okay, I'm going to designate that coin to be used as a fastener before Shabbos. You have to go a step further and actually, before Shabbos begins, put that coin through the buttonhole and sort of prepare it that way. Now it's already been, set up before Shabbos began as a fastener, and then it's going to be permitted to use during Shabbos and to go out in the public domain with it. And then comes the question of, well, what if she's going to use a nut, right, to be the fastener, but the concern is she doesn't really need to fasten her cloak with this nut as a fastener, but by using the nut as a fastener later when she's out in the public domain and she's walking around with her 6-year-old child who's going to be hungry, she can take the nut out and give it to the child to eat. So it's sort of using this permission of the rabbis in order to achieve what would otherwise be prohibited. Meaning she can't carry the nut. This is a public domain where there's no eruv, so you can't carry this nut to give to the child as a snack later, but she could use the artifice of using it as a fastener to the cloak so that it's available to give to the child later. Are we going to permit that? And so in understanding whether they should allow that or not, the rabbis look at the situation of somebody who is having a fire. There's a house fire. And we're not going to go into the rules of house fires and Shabbos. That's a complicated issue. But one of the rules that comes out of that discussion is that a person who wants to save like their most valued, most prized clothing from a fire, like they can't carry that stuff out of the burning building. First of all, they shouldn't go in there because they're endangering their lives and it's burning too bad. Like it's going to burn, but you should save your life. But if they're desperate to save some garments, they can put on several layers of garments and carry it outside and not violate Shabbos. And the rabbis permit that because it's better they should put on a few layers of clothing that they don't really need than to try to extinguish the fire, right? Putting out a fire or creating fire on Shabbos is prohibited. And so we'd rather they just put on a few layers of clothing than put out the fire in order to save the clothing. And you don't have to think about it as the extreme case of the whole house is on fire, but think of a small fire and they want to rescue clothing from that fire. Let them put on a few layers rather than put out the fire in that area of the home. So that's a kind of artifice that we allow. And so regarding the nut, is it going to be a problem that she's going to use that as an artifice, right? So, or perhaps even according to the one who said that one may not employ artifice in the case of a fire, there's a distinction. So even there's a dispute. They didn't come to the final conclusion. There is a distinction between the cases of the woman using a nut as a fastener so she can give a nut to her kid later, or the one who's putting on multiple. Or perhaps even according to the one, there is a distinction between the cases. There, in the case of a fire, wearing garments is the typical manner in which one takes clothing out into the public domain. However, here, utilizing a nut as a button is not the typical manner in which one takes a nut out to the public domain. Since no Torah prohibition is violated by doing so, perhaps we should say that she may well employ the artifice to take the nut out to her son. And the Gemara concludes, taiku. And taiku is one of these cases where they didn't decide. They didn't arrive at a halacha. Some sages prohibit, some sages permit, and they leave it there. And that's why in cases like that, to understand what the law is for us, you'd have to check with a competent authority, look it up in Shulchan Aruch, etc. What are the conditions in that time and in that place? Okay, that's what I've got for us today. Melissa Beineman says, so we don't tie shoelaces on Shabbos. Slip-ons are fine, but how were Velcro, buttons, snaps, zippers all debated? We don't have a violation of tying shoelaces. We can tie our shoelaces on Shabbos. When we talked about shoelaces the other day, we talked about the order of putting on shoes, right? We put on the right shoe, then the left shoe, then we tie the left shoe, and then we tie the right shoe. But we can tie our shoelaces on Shabbos. I certainly do. I wear my shoes to shul and go out in the public domain. Okay. Several layers, like when I was trying to get it at the airport. Yeah, I mean, that, you know, and listen, there have been many times in our history when we've been refugees and we took to wearing lots of layers of clothing. You know, if that was all the only way to carry the clothing, then we wore the layers of clothing. You know, I mean, Jews have been refugees so many times and in so many places that it's almost instinctive to figure out how we can preserve, you know, necessities when we're on the run. I mean, it's just a necessary skill. And then when we're safe, you know, now during the pandemic, especially at the beginning of it, when people were really worried, like, you know, are we going to be able to get food into the house? Are we going to get basic necessities? I was immediately reminded of my grandmother, who carried my mother as an infant through the Holocaust, through a concentration camp. She survived. My mother survived. Unfortunately, my grandfather perished. And then when I grew up, you know, there was huge cabinets in the kitchen, a pantry closet in the kitchen, and a wall of shelves in the garage, always packed with food. You know, and that is the result of somebody who has a personal memory, you know, of having everything taken away and being desperately hungry, right? And I don't have that personal memory, right? Thank God I didn't live through those unspeakable horrors. But my mother did as a baby, and my grandmother did. And I saw the photos and heard the stories. And we passed those, you know, those important memories and that preparation for the emergency down through our generations. Okay, that is what I've got for us today. I'm wishing you all a very happy Mother's Day. If you are a mom, you know, shkoyach. You do the most important work there is. You know, may you be strengthened to keep doing your work. May you be blessed with children that acknowledge you and thank you and call you and give you gifts and take care of you and love you the way you love them. And it's tough this year, you know, when we can't take our moms, we can't hug them, we maybe can't take them out to a nice Mother's Day brunch or the different things that we do. But, you know, we certainly honor moms on this day. The bedrock of our tradition is the mom. And we should only hear good news. And next Mother's Day we should be in Jerusalem and Mashiach has come and we're all dancing a hora together. But certainly may next Mother's Day find us, you know, with this pandemic a long path